I never thought a simple nylon tent could feel like a body bag until I heard that scratching. The Appalachian Trail in late October is a masterpiece of dying colors and oppressive silence. I'd hiked the Blue Ridge section a dozen times, but never solo, and never this deep into the George Washington National Forest. I wanted the isolation. I wanted that specific brand of quiet that only exists when you're miles away from the nearest paved road. By 5:30 p.m., the sun had already dipped behind the jagged spine of the mountains, leaving the woods in a bruised, purple twilight. The air turned sharp, smelling of damp earth and rotting oak leaves. I set up my camp at a small, unofficial clearing about half a mile off the main trail. It was a perfect spot, or so I thought, shielded by a dense thicket of mountain laurel and overlooking a steep ravine. I went through the motions of a seasoned hiker, filtered 2 liters of water, hung my bear bag about 50 yards from my tent, and started a small, controlled fire. Everything felt routine, safe. But as the darkness truly settled in, the forest changed. It didn't just get dark. It felt like the trees were stepping closer, tightening the circle around my campsite. The first odd thing happened around 9 p.m. I was sitting by the dying embers of my fire, finishing a cup of instant coffee, when I heard a whistle. It wasn't a bird or the wind moving through a hollow log. It was a human whistle, 2 descending notes, clear and melodic, coming from the pitch-black woods toward the ravine. I froze, my heart thumping against my ribs. In the backcountry, you expect to hear branches snapping or the occasional scurry of a nocturnal animal. But human sounds are wrong. They don't belong there at night. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and pathetic in the vastness. No response. Just the crackle of a lone ember and the wind sighing through the canopy. I told myself it was a screech owl or some strange acoustic trick of the mountains. I crawled into my tent, zipped the rainfly tight, and slid into my sleeping bag. I kept my headlamp around my neck and my bushcraft knife within reach. Sleep was a restless, shallow thing, interrupted by the vivid imagination of a man alone in the dark. I woke up at 2:14 a.m. The silence was gone. It was replaced by a rhythmic, heavy thudding. Something was circling the tent. The footsteps were heavy enough to vibrate the ground beneath my sleeping pad. Whatever it was bipedal. It wasn't the light, 4-point gait of a deer, or the lumbering shuffle of a black bear. This was a deliberate 2-legged walk. I sat up, holding my breath, my hand trembling as I gripped the handle of my knife. The footsteps stopped, right outside the thin polyester wall of the tent. I could hear it breathing, long, ragged inhalations that sounded wet, like someone struggling with a chest cold. Then the scratching started. It wasn't a clawing motion, it was a single finger or something like it, dragging slowly down the side of the tent. The sound of a nail against taut nylon is something I will never forget. It moved from the top of the tent down to the zipper. I stared at the silhouette through the rainfly, but the moon was obscured by clouds, leaving only a vague, darker than dark shape looming over me. It was tall. "I have a gun," I lied, my voice cracking. "I'm armed. Get the hell away from my camp." The breathing stopped instantly. For a full minute, there was absolutely nothing. Then, a voice whispered from just inches away. It wasn't a voice I recognized, but it mimicked my own tone perfectly. "I'm armed," the voice rasped, sounding like a warped recording of my own panicked warning. "Get the hell away from my camp." The sheer wrongness of it sent a jolt of primal terror through me. I fumbled for my headlamp and clicked it on, the beam cutting through the fabric. The light revealed the shadow of a hand pressed against the tent. It had too many knuckles, and the fingers were elongated, pressing deep into the material as if trying to feel the heat of my body through the barrier. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound, and stabbed the knife through the tent wall right where the hand was. The blade met no resistance. The shadow vanished instantly. I heard something sprint away, but it didn't sound like a man running through the brush. It sounded like something heavy being dragged through the leaves at an impossible speed. heading straight down into the steep rocky ravine. I didn't stay to see if it would come back. I didn't even grab my boots. I shoved my feet into my unlaced trail runners, grabbed my car keys and my light, and bolted. I ran the half-mile back to the Appalachian Trail in a state of pure adrenaline-fueled hysteria. Every shadow was a reaching hand. Every rustle of the wind was that mocking, mimicked voice. I reached my old Subaru at the trailhead at 3:30 a.m., my shins bleeding from briars and my lungs burning. I drove until I hit a gas station in a small town 3 counties over, under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of the parking lot. I finally looked at my tent, which I had somehow managed to shove into the trunk in my panic. There was no blood on the knife, but there were 3 long, deliberate slashes on the outside of the rainfly, perfectly spaced. And near the bottom of the tent, printed in the fine mountain dust that had settled on the fabric, was a handprint. It looked human, except the thumb was located on the wrong side of the palm, and the fingertips ended in perfectly circular, suction-like indentations. I never went back for the rest of my gear. I checked the local news for weeks afterward, looking for missing hikers or strange sightings near the George Washington National Forest. There was nothing, just the usual reports of people losing their way or succumbing to the elements. But I know what I heard. I know that thing was waiting for me to stop talking so it could find the right pitch for its own voice. To this day, I can't be in a quiet room without feeling like something is listening, waiting for me to speak, so it can learn how to sound like me again. The Fairmont in Nebraska isn't a place you visit for the luxury. It's a place you stop because the cornfields have blurred into a monotonous gray haze, and your eyelids feel like they're weighted with lead. It was late October, 2023, and a freak sleet storm had turned the I-80 into a skating rink. I pulled into the gravel lot of a 3-story brick building that looked like it had been holding its breath since the 50s. The neon sign buzzed with a dying flicker, casting a sickly pink glow over the frozen slush. I just wanted 6 hours of sleep. That's all. The lobby smelled of stale clove cigarettes and industrial floor wax. The clerk didn't look up from his ledger, a heavy leather-bound thing that seemed wildly out of place next to a dusty computer monitor. He pushed a heavy brass key across the counter. Room 322. His fingers were stained yellow, and he didn't offer a welcome or a pleasant stay. He just watched me walk toward the elevator with an expression that I can only describe as profound, exhausted pity. The 3rd floor was silent, not the peaceful silence of a library, but the heavy, pressurized silence of a deep-sea trench. My footsteps on the floral-patterned carpet felt muffled, as if the walls were absorbing the sound. When I reached 322, the key turned with a reluctant metallic groan. The room was unremarkable. A queen bed with a beige polyester spread, a bolted-down television, and a single window overlooking the dark expanse of the plains. But there was a smell, faint but persistent. It was copper and old peaches. I checked the bathroom, thinking maybe a pipe had burst, but everything was dry. I chalked it up to the age of the building and collapsed onto the bed, not even bothering to undress. I woke up at 3:14 a.m. I know the time because the red digits of the alarm clock were the only things visible in the suffocating darkness. The room felt different. The air was colder, thick enough to make every breath a conscious effort. Then I heard it. A soft, rhythmic, dragging sound coming from the wall behind the headboard. It sounded like someone was pulling a heavy bag of salt across the floor in the next room. I sat up, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and foreign. The scraping stopped instantly. I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. Just as I convinced myself it was the building settling, a voice whispered. It didn't come from the hallway or the neighboring room. It sounded like it was coming from inside my own pillow. "Help me move it, it's too heavy for one." I scrambled off the bed, hitting the lamp switch. The light flickered and died. I fumbled for my phone, using the flashlight to scan the room. Everything looked the same, yet everything felt fundamentally wrong. I noticed a small, dark smudge on the beige carpet near the baseboard that I hadn't seen before. It looked wet. I walked over to the wall and pressed my ear against the wallpaper. I expected silence, or maybe the hum of an AC unit. Instead, I heard sobbing. Not the loud, dramatic crying of a movie, but the broken, hitching gasps of someone who has been screaming for hours and has no voice left. "Are you okay?" I whispered, my hand trembling against the wall. The sobbing stopped. A soft thud hit the wall right where my ear was, as if someone had leaned their forehead against the other side. "I can't get out," the voice said. It was a woman's voice, but it sounded distorted, like it was being played through a broken speaker. "The door? They took the handle. They took the handle on your side too." I spun around and sprinted to the door. I grabbed the brass knob and twisted. It turned, but the door wouldn't budge. It felt like it was welded into the frame. I pulled with everything I had, my boots slipping on the carpet, but it didn't even rattle. I looked down at the lock. There wasn't a keyhole on the inside anymore. Just a smooth, flat plate of brass. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my system. I ran to the window, intending to smash it. But when I pulled back the heavy curtains, I didn't see the parking lot. I didn't see the sleet or the neon sign. The window looked out into another room. It was a perfect mirror image of the room I was standing in, except it was occupied. A man was sitting on the edge of the bed, his back to me. He was hunched over, his hands covering his face. On the wall behind him, written in what looked like dark dried syrup, were hundreds of tally marks. I pounded on the glass. "Hey, can you hear me? Help!" The man didn't move. He didn't even flinch. I realized then that the window wasn't a window at all. It was a thick pane of glass looking into room 321, and there was no glass on his side. He was just there. I backed away, tripping over my suitcase. As I fell, my flashlight beam hit the floorboards under the bed. The beige carpet had been sliced. A neat, rectangular flap had been cut away, revealing the wood beneath. And in that wood, someone had carved a message with a desperate, shaky hand. "Do not fall asleep. They count the heartbeats. Once the total reaches 0, you become the room." I felt a presence behind me. I didn't want to turn around, but I couldn't help it. The closet door, which had been shut tight when I entered, was now cracked open a few inches. A pale, long-fingered hand was gripping the edge of the wood. The skin was the color of parchment, stretched so tight over the knuckles that it looked ready to tear. "You're the 4th one this week," the voice from the wall whispered, sounding almost gleeful now. "The ledger has to stay balanced. Someone always stays behind so someone else can leave." I didn't think. I grabbed the heavy brass lamp from the nightstand, the one that hadn't worked, and swung it with every ounce of terror-fueled strength I possessed at the window, looking into the other room. The glass shattered into 1,000 jagged diamonds. The man on the bed finally turned around. He didn't have a face, just a smooth, featureless surface of skin where his eyes and mouth should have been. He rose with a jerky, unnatural motion like a marionette being pulled by tangled strings. I leaped through the broken frame into his room. The air there smelled of copper and old peaches, 10 times stronger than in my room. I didn't look back. I ran for the door of room 321. To my shock, it swung open easily. I sprinted down the hallway, down the stairs, and burst into the lobby. The clerk was still there, sitting behind the ledger. He didn't look surprised to see me covered in sweat and glass dust. He just looked at the clock. 3:33 a.m., he muttered. "A bit early, but I suppose it'll do." "What is this place?" I screamed, leaning over the counter. "What is wrong with those rooms?" He finally looked at me. His eyes were milky with cataracts, yet he seemed to see right through me. He flipped the ledger open to the current date. There, in elegant, fountain pen script, was my name. Next to it in the checkout column was a single word: pending. "You didn't check out, son," he said softly. "You just moved. But the room always remembers its guests." I ran to my car and drove until the sun came up, never looking in the rearview mirror. I'm in a different state now, in a bright modern apartment with 3 locks on the door. But every night at 3:14 a.m., I hear it. Scrape, scrape. It's coming from under my bed, and this morning when I woke up, I found a brass key on my nightstand. It has the number 322 etched into it. I think I'm still there, asleep in that beige bed, and this life, this fear, is just what the room is dreaming for me until it's time to balance the ledger. Late September 2024, and the air in Bonaventure Cemetery was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying Spanish moss. I'm a freelance photographer, and I've always been drawn to the beautifully macabre. There's a certain stillness in old southern graveyards that you can't find anywhere else. But that night, the stillness felt heavy, almost pressurized. I had stayed long after the tourists left. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a bruised purple. I was packing my gear near the back section of the cemetery, an area where the tombstones are so weathered by time that the names have melted into the stone. I heard it first, a soft, rhythmic thudding. It wasn't the sound of a footstep, it was the sound of a shovel hitting packed dirt. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or perhaps a groundskeeper working late. Though it was nearly 8 p.m., I followed the sound, my boots crunching softly on the gravel path. I peered through a thicket of weeping willows and saw a man. He was tall, gaunt, and wearing a yellow slicker that looked decades old. He was digging, but he wasn't digging a new grave. He was reopening one that had clearly been settled for a long time. The headstone next to him was small, tilted at a sharp angle. "Hey, what are you doing?" I called out, my voice sounding thin in the vast expanse of the dead. The man didn't turn around. He just stood there, his back to me, leaning on the spade. The silence that followed was suffocating. I felt a cold prickle of sweat run down my spine. This wasn't a worker. There were no lights, no truck, no equipment. Just a man in a hole in the middle of the night. "I'm calling the police," I said, reaching for my phone. Though my hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped it. The man slowly began to turn. His movements were jerky, like a marionette being pulled by tangled strings. When his face caught the dim light of my flashlight, my heart stopped. He didn't have eyes, not really, just deep hollow pits that seemed to swallow the light. His skin looked like gray parchment stretched too tightly over a skull. He didn't run at me. He didn't scream. He simply pointed into the hole he had been digging. Then he whispered a single word that I felt in my bones, more than I heard with my ears. "Listen." I should have run. Every instinct in my body told me to bolt for the gates. But curiosity is a dark master. I stepped closer, my flashlight beam trembling over the edge of the pit. The coffin was visible, a rotted wooden box, the lid partially splintered. My blood turned to ice. From inside the coffin, 6 feet under the Georgia soil, came a frantic, desperate scratching. It was the sound of fingernails tearing against wood. Then, a voice, a muffled, high-pitched whimpering of a child. "Mommy, it's dark. Please, I can't breathe." I plummeted to my knees, clawing at the dirt, thinking someone had been buried alive. I didn't care about the gaunt man anymore. I just needed to get that lid open. I grabbed the man's discarded shovel and slammed it into the wood. The lid gave way. I shone my light inside, expecting to see a terrified child. Instead, the coffin was empty of life. There was only a heap of tattered Victorian-era clothing and a small porcelain doll. But as the light hit the doll, its glass eyes rolled upward to look directly at me. Its mouth, painted in a permanent rosebud pout, slowly cracked open. High-pitched, distorted child's laughter. I looked up to find the man in the yellow slicker, but he was gone. The cemetery was empty. Then I felt it. A cold, clammy hand gripping my ankle from inside the grave. A hand, skeletal and covered in black mold, was reaching out from the shadows of the empty coffin. It wasn't trying to pull itself out. It was trying to pull me in. I kicked wildly, my boot connecting with something that felt like brittle glass. I scrambled backward, falling over a nearby urn, and didn't stop running until I reached my car. I drove straight to the police station. When I brought them back to the site an hour later, the grave was perfectly intact. The grass on top was green and undisturbed. The headstone was upright. There was no hole, no shovel, no man. The lead officer looked at me with a mix of pity and annoyance. "Son, this plot hasn't been touched since 1892. This is the grave of little Emily Vance. She died of yellow fever. Her mother went mad, claiming she could still hear Emily crying from the ground. She spent every night here until she passed away herself." I tried to tell them what I saw, but the words felt like ash in my mouth. I went home and tried to forget. But that night, as I lay in bed in my locked apartment, I heard it. It started under my bed, scratched, and then the smell hit me. the unmistakable cloying scent of damp earth and decaying Spanish moss. I looked down at the edge of my bed. A small porcelain hand was gripping the frame. Then, a muffled voice came from beneath the floorboards, vibrating through the wood and into my very soul. "It's dark down here. Why won't you come back to the garden?" I haven't slept since. I moved to a high-rise apartment in the city, far away from any dirt or trees. But every time it rains, I see a man in a yellow slicker, standing across the street, leaning on a shovel, waiting. He knows I heard her. And once you hear the dead, they never stop talking to you.